Of day one of our first ever Save Our Biodiversity Telethon for the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales. Thank you so much to everybody who's been chipping in throughout today. It's been absolutely wonderful. All the messages of support, the money that people have been donating, it really is magnificent and it makes a huge difference. We're well on our way to meeting our targets. So this money is really key to us being able to do the work that we do, to speak up for nature here in New South Wales, and hopefully through the day you've got a bit of a sense of some of the challenges that nature is facing here in New South Wales. Now, one of the campaigns we've been running for a while now, which you might have heard about, is our campaign against some crazy proposals to recreate what's called a biomass industry. That is, to take timber from our public forests and burn it for so-called renewable energy in disused coal-fired power stations, one in particular in the Hunter Valley. We've been working hard to try to stop this proposal in its track. There are all sorts of proposals that would see us create new markets for native forests, which of course spells very, very bad news for biodiversity. Earlier, I caught up with Wilson Harris, who's one of our fantastic community organisers who works on forests in particular, to get a bit of an idea of the campaign that he's been working on to share with you. So, Wilson, thanks for joining us for the telethon. You're a community organiser with Nature Conservation Council. Tell us, what does a day in the life of Wilson look like?
Well, it's a real mixed bag and it keeps it fresh most of the time, but often I'll go visit groups on the ground, so it could be in Callala Bay. We have a new member group there who are fighting a proposal to develop forest there, or head down to Bega and meet with the local MP with some community groups there that are our members. And then the rest of the time there's a lot of research, policy creation and working with our colleagues to build that.
So we've got 184, I think, member groups across New South Wales, ranging from sort of huge organisations like National Parks Association, Colong, which are now called Wilderness Australia, where you used to work.
That's right.
Total Environment Centre, those real big organisations, through to sort of more regional organisations, Sutherland Shire Environment Centre, Bellingen Environment Centre, Willoughby, you know, there's a bunch of them across the state. But you would work with some quite small groups as well, wouldn't you?
That's right, yeah. The ones on the south coast, we have the Southeast Regional Conservation Alliance, which is the umbrella group. It's the regional peak body, have you? And then there's a lot of other really small grassroots groups. As I mentioned before, Callala Bay, there's Manyana Matters, who are really focused on just a very specific issue in their local community for the time being. That is the development of local bushland that they care about. And that's the case up and down the south coast where my patch extends to. And but some are not only interested in the bush, there's the marine-based groups who have been fighting to protect the Batemans Bay sanctuaries, marine sanctuaries for years, which is a hot topic currently.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that people would have probably heard of in recent times is this kind of proposal to make a new industry out of biomass. Do you want to, for those who perhaps haven't seen that, do you want to give us a quick rundown of what is biomass? Why does it matter? Why should people care?
Sure. Biomass is where power plants, they can be ex-coal power plants, will burn timber basically for electricity. It's something that we should have gotten rid of a long time ago. We've come a long way since then, and somehow is a backward step even from coal. And the proposals in Australia, they're hoping to use our native forest, which is a resource for the public and should be protected for biodiversity, carbon and many other things. But instead they're proposing we cut that down, wood chip it and then burn it in these power stations for 5 minutes of electricity.
And calling that renewable.
That's right, yeah, because
in 100 years' time, the tree will grow back. And so therefore, over a 1,000-year cycle or something, perhaps it is renewable, but not if you're trying to deal with climate change.
That's right. It's very dodgy carbon accounting to classify this as renewable. And it's an issue that has taken off overseas. In Europe, there's a huge amount of it. In America, they log and export a lot of their pine to feed these biomass power stations. So it's a real threat in Australia, and we need to head it off now before it gets a foothold.
Tell us, so this proposal, the Red Bank power stations, you've had a bit of success dealing with sort of overseas entities. Do you want to just explain a little bit about what's happened there?
Sure. So Red Bank Power Station was being, another company called Sweetman's Renewables were proposing to provide them with basically all their timber needs to run the power station as a biomass power station. Sweetman were also claiming that they had some contracts overseas with Japanese biomass power stations where they could get native forest in Australia to be cut down, wood chipped, and then exported overseas to be burnt in Japanese power stations. So it's not even generating electricity in Australia. But we've contacted and worked with grassroots groups over there, and through that we found out that, in fact, this Sweetman Renewables group had lied about a contract that they were claiming they had with the Japanese company. So the contract never existed. They'd told potential investors that they had this $90 million contract with this Japanese company.
Now this is all the subject of an ASIC investigation that's going on right now.
That's right, and we referred them to ASIC, and ASIC has now got a special investigation team to look into them to see if they've misled potential and actual investors in their company.
Okay, last two questions. Hardest thing about your job, most satisfying thing about your job?
Sure.
It's like a performance appraisal.
Oh, what are my weaknesses? Hardest, I think, is juggling a lot of different issues at once. You know, and especially when you're an organizer, you're dealing with a lot of groups with niche grassroots issues that aren't particularly in your field of expertise. You know,
and that's worth telling people, right? Like, how big is your patch? Because I think sometimes people think that, you know, we've got hundreds of people that are out in the field working. Like, we've got a handful of community organisers. How big's the area that you look after?
Basically from Eden till South Sydney, really. So it's a massive area, and you know, another hard part about it, I guess, is the travel. But personally, I love the travel, and it's fantastic to get out into the communities, meet these groups, and work with them. And they're all such capable operators. Again, probably the best part of it is learning from these experienced campaigners who have been working in their field and in their communities for a long time. They've got so much knowledge, so much experience, and working with them is actually a real treat and helps me get better at my job.
And best thing?
Best thing is probably that. But yeah, I think travel as well, and getting out into these patches of bush and forest that, you know, anyone would be lucky to see. And you get taken into these areas that people are desperate to protect. And from the outside, you might not really understand why all these few hectares here or there are that important. But once you get in there, you see some special places.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's only a couple of days till the end of the financial year, which is where a lot of people make their decisions about where to donate their money. Look down the lens. What is why should the person who's watching this right now pull out their wallet and send a few bucks to keep your work on the road?
Great. We're 9 months out from the 2023 state election, and we have some very well-developed plans to stop native forest logging in this state and to end the biomass industry before it can get a foothold. It is crucial that we do both these things before the life of the logging industry in New South Wales is locked in for a decade or more period of time. And if we can really head off the biomass threat now, then it's likely it will never kick off in New South Wales, which would save koalas, greater gliders, gang cockatoos, and many others from extinction.
One.